2018.
Planning Commission for the City of Wilsonville, Wednesday, September 12th, 2018 is now in session. The time is 6:09. Please rise for the pledge. Oh, I'm sorry. Would the clerk call the roll?
Chair Greenfield,
Here.
Vice Chair Postma, Ron Heberlein,
Here.
Peter Hurley,
Here.
Cameron Mesbah, Phyllis Millen,
Here.
Simon Springall.
Now we'll rise for the pledge.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
This is a time in our agenda when citizens have the opportunity to address the Planning Commission regarding any item that is not already scheduled for a formal public hearing tonight. If any member of the audience would like to speak about any work session item or any other matter of concern, please raise your hand so that we may hear from you. I see none. We have on our agenda tonight, I'm sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself again. We have distributed the minutes of our August 8th meeting. I assume that we've all studied them in detail. Are there any additions, corrections to be made? Hearing none, the minutes are accepted as distributed. We have on our agenda tonight 2 legislative hearing matters. The first is a presentation and hearing on a smart programs enhancement strategy. Mr. Bashir. Oh, thank you. Oh, was it?
Yeah, we do. You got to read it out language.
Okay.
Chair Greenfield, can you read the?
I will. It's my favorite text. Matters before the Planning Commission involve legislative public hearings. These are somewhat different from the quasi-judicial hearings conducted by the city's Development Review Board. The Planning Commission would like to hear from anyone who has testimony to offer that is relevant to the issues before the Planning Commission. If you wish to testify tonight, please fill out one of the cards on the table and make sure that it is given to a member of the staff. Actually, to our clerk would be best, because your testimony gives you legal standing in the matter for which you are testifying. It is important that you provide your full name and address on the testimony card or at the beginning of your comments. When you testify, please address your comments to the criteria that will be reviewed by the city staff at the start of the hearing. Pardon. Some of the issues that come before the Planning Commission are fairly complicated. For that reason, we especially appreciate any specific recommendations or suggestions that you may have. We will ask you to avoid redundant testimony. If you agree with testimony that has already been given, just tell us that. If we have a large number of people interested in testifying, we may limit the time allotted to each. When you come to the microphone, please state your name and your address, or if you prefer not to state your address aloud in the public forum, state that your address is as provided on the testimony card you submitted for the record and speak into the microphone. At the end of your testimony, members of the commission may have questions for you, and thank you for taking the time to come here tonight and help us deal with these issues. Now we welcome Mr. Bashir.
All right, thank you, Chairman Greenfield, members of the commission. My name is Dwight Bashir. I am the Transit Director for SMART. And joining me this evening to my left is Nicole Hendricks. She is our Transit Management Analyst. And to her left is Mr. Eric Loomis. He is our Operations Manager. This is our third appearance before the commission now in as many months. We first arrived here before you in June, and then we were here August 8th, and then tonight. We are asking for approval for our programs enhancement strategy. Back in 2017, the Oregon legislature passed HB 2017, which brought, among other things, 0.1% employee payroll tax. And myself and a few others fought very, very hard to keep the monies that are generated in Wilsonville. And that was not an easy struggle, but we have at least thus far won that battle. And the legislation is very clear as to the uses for this funding. And so we have tried to follow those guidelines to the letter so that we, Wilsonville and SMART, will be eligible for those funds. There's no guarantee that we would be eligible otherwise. And so, again, we have put together what we call our programs enhancement strategy, looking across our product offering and making some decisions as to what types of projects we think would benefit the residents of Wilsonville and those that use the SMART system. With that, we, and required by HB 2017, we did a pretty aggressive public outreach, and I think we were here last month in August, and we talked about the results of that particular outreach and what the public was telling us they wanted to see with that particular funding. And so, again, we come before you to ask for approval for this plan so that we can move forward with the enhancements that the public has charged us with making. Talked a little bit about the background. Again, I think it's important, and I think there's been, some level of confusion that this is an employee-based payroll tax and not an employer-based payroll tax. The architects of HB 2017, who I met with, Senator Beyer and Representative McEwen, were very clear on their intent. And they are not interested in walls or boundaries or anything. They are interested in tying urban areas to rural areas. They are interested in tying urban areas to other urban areas. And so we think our plan does exactly what the architects intended it to do. I'll have Nicole talk a little bit about our outreach and some of the things that resulted from that.
So we did cover the outreach quite a bit last time, so I'd like to just give updates since we last saw you on the outreach that we've done, just to notify people of a hearing coming up. So we had a public hearing notice on the city's website, and we had alerts go out through our SMART news letter list of people, and then the spokesman, also in the Boones Ferry Messenger. That's a clip of the picture in the Boones Ferry Messenger for this month. There was also an email list of interested parties. Tammy was super helpful with that. And then we've had quite a few inquiries, just emails from different folks on our 1X service saying, hey, I hear there might be Wi-Fi coming, or I hear there might be later service. And so just responding to those. And then also we had, since this is an amendment to our transit master plan, our DLCD submittal last month. So, and then in terms of the document, the things that we've changed since the last meeting are we included language about performance measures and how we're gonna look at different projects. And they do have different lenses because some of the projects are gonna be more of passenger miles traveled will determine if it's successful, or maybe it's a satisfaction survey. Things, it might vary a bit. But we added language in there, and with the idea that a lot of these projects will be a pilot, like a year-long pilot to see how it goes, and then at the end, we review and see how the projects are doing, to see if we should continue with them or not. And then also just clarified the funding source of the projects. That was from a city council work session, just to ensure that this was employee payroll tax funds that are going to be used to support these projects versus employer payroll tax. So those are the updates since the last time we saw you.
All right, so, again, we went before the city council with an Appendix B amendment to the transit master plan, which allowed us to make the deadline for filing so that we could request the monies that were collected or currently being collected in Wilsonville. So we've made that particular deadline. We are waiting for TriMet to put their plan together. They haven't yet completed that. They're still doing some public outreach with that, but we are positioned to do that. These projects will be eligible for that funding, as well as there are two other pots of funding, one called the discretionary pot, and then the other one is the intercommunity funds. And so if approved, these particular projects become eligible for those funds as well. And those are more competitive in nature. And so we will have to put together a request that clearly outlines why we believe that our projects would be successful. And if the stars line up and we get approval to move forward with those projects, then we will start to implement them as well. So there's a great opportunity here in Wilsonville. A lot of exciting things are happening in transit right now, and we certainly don't want to put Wilsonville in a position where we are playing second fiddle, as it were, to any of the other agencies that will be competing for these dollars. I think we have a very, very robust transit system for a city our size. We are the envy of a number of other cities. I will be making a presentation, Nicole and I, next week before the Westland City Council. They are interested in what makes smart, and they've got some challenges in Westland that they want us to help them try to figure out on a consulting level, and so we're anxious to do that. We're working with Hillsborough and Beaverton and some of the others because they recognize that what we do here is very unique. And so, again, we asked your consideration for the program's enhancement strategy. And we are prepared to answer any and all questions you might have.
I have just one clarification question, and that is on the Appendix B. Priority level 1 is the 2X to Tualatin, and then enhanced connections to TriMet. And then down in priority level number 6, service to Tualatin with the TriMet line 96 connection to downtown Portland. Could you just kind of explain how those are different? And
yeah, I believe I can do my best to answer that question for you. So the first one, the priority there, is regarding the difference between the spread of service commuter time versus the midday service to Tualatin and Tigard, focusing on those areas and the connections there, whereas the second one is the frequency of service, how many times we go to those different areas, and then focusing on particularly the downtown connection with the Route 96.
Okay, so if I understand it correctly, then what this is doing is adding more service that would potentially connect you with downtown Portland. And then the latter one is an additional line, or am I misinterpreting?
Yeah, just a span of service. So later in the evening service, possibly earlier in the morning, and then particularly on our weekend service as well, our Saturday, we would expand those hours and possibly our frequency.
Okay. And then the next question was around expansion to the Oregon City area. Where does that, because that was back in our in the new destinations of the priority list, but I don't see, is that still in that first round of things that you would be working towards, or?
So the Oregon City project would be ripe for the discretionary, the intercommunity funds.
Okay.
So that wouldn't be, the Appendix B projects are more for that formula funding.
For that formula, it's just for that?
Yeah,
Okay.
and then the Oregon City, the new services, new connections are more of that competitive pot of funding.
Okay. Two different funding sources?
Yeah.
Okay. I think I was-
Same funding source, but separated into different pots.
Got, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, thank you.
So just for the sake of clarity, as I look at there's the attachment 1 on page 14 of 19, it's got the priority level and it's got some kind of cost estimates and those sorts of things. So what is the next step? Say we get the funds, what's the next step to kind of then make the decisions as to what do we do with those funds when they come in the door to kind of implement the things that we see on this page?
Well, although the law requires that we put these projects in priority, there is no requirement that we implement them in priority order. The monies, if approved, the entire list of projects, if approved by the OTC, will release the money into Wilsonville and to the other communities, but we're speaking about Wilsonville. Right. Once that money arrives, then we can look at what's the low-hanging fruit, what are the things that we can take care of right now, what are probably things that can be, put off for a while. We have in our plan, planning for Frog Pond and Basalt Creek and Coffee Creek, and when those monies will be necessary to be expended may be down the road, but those monies will still be in our coffers and have been received.
Okay, so, but then it's just going to go through the normal council process of this is in our budget, we're going to spend these monies here, is that so? Because I'm recognizing what you're saying, right? I mean, like the first priority item on the list is $3 million and we don't have that much money coming in right away. So you got to find the low hanging fruit, but then so you go to the lower priorities. And so I just want to make sure that the public understands how is it that we get to, okay, money came in the door and we're still going to spend it, but it's still going to go through the normal budgetary process.
Of course, yes.
For the sake of determining which ones we're going to do first.
Right.
Okay.
The chart that you see here of funds that are expected are estimates, and ODOT told us about a month ago that they believe that the first allotment or apportionment of money that will be coming in was probably very liberal in their estimates, and so they're expecting those monies to be less. However, in the out years, the 2 out years, they're expecting that things will probably true up. So right now, with the expectation that we would receive our first check, if you will, in some March or April of 2019, we don't really know how much that will be, and so that will determine what we're able to do.
Right.
So,
okay,
yeah.
Great.
Within the priority 1 new destinations, do we have a breakdown of priorities within that priority?
Yes.
Yeah, so when we had the survey go out, I believe the one on the screen there, it shows, those are in priority order, Portland, Oregon City, Woodburn, and then Hillsborough, as far as what the
I see.
yeah, is what the public rated those as. So again, I mean, service to Portland, obviously the most costly one. The first step there, we would look at that 96 connection rather than just a straight express route on Smart. We would look at working with TriMet to make that a better connections.
Is there a sub-process for looking at that?
Looking at,
At these priorities and the way that they work out?
yeah, I mean, a couple different ways. One obviously, when we plan the routes would be to look at the cost of those as the money comes in. And then two, look at the usage of it, which would be, so we have the survey of the priority that the public wanted. Now, what would get the best use for the money that's available to us?
And we're working with, if you notice all of those new destinations being Portland, Oregon City, Woodburn, and Hillsborough, we're working with ODOT on a kind of a out there plan where buses would be allowed to operate on the shoulder. And they do it in a number of states across the country. And so in order to make the Portland trip really work and attract ridership, you can't just put it in the traffic with every other vehicle out there. It doesn't make sense. And so we're looking at bus on shoulder. And so if we have a sense, I mean, they're open to at least as they're planning expansion of interstates, they are going to make sure that the shoulders could, in fact, handle buses, which is a good first step. But getting ODOT to then take the next step and say, you know, we want to try a pilot project on the shoulder, maybe a little bit further down the line. But I think in order to make, especially anything north of here and west of here, as like Hillsborough work, we're going to need some shoulder access along those freeways.
I might just add to that as well, bringing up partnerships. It would be also looking at partnerships where we've already been in conversations with Woodburn and Salem, obviously, Chariots, to get some IGAs together to not only have that burden completely on Smart at the city of Wilsonville, but also to have that a shared system with other transit systems.
Yeah. And I know Woodburn is a concern for some of the folks here. And in speaking with Woodburn, the three of us drove down there and spoke with them. Their interest is in commuter service. They're not interested in midday service. They're pretty much interested in getting the folks that work here in Wilsonville, and maybe the ones that live here in Wilsonville and work in Woodburn, I guess that's possible, back and forth. Without having to put single occupancy vehicles on the interstate there. So I went down and we expressed the concern of the city and the businesses that about the outlet malls and things like that. So I mean, that's really not their concern.
You referred to an intercommunity fund. Could you explain what that is?
Yeah, as part of the HB 2017, there are technically three pots of money. The formula funds, the funds that are generated here in Wilsonville, we get 90% of those back in Wilsonville. 10% of those funds go to ODOT to set up the two other programs. 1% of that 10% is for administrative costs. And so they're setting up a whole department down there to administer this. 5% of that money is that the intercommunity or is it the 4%?
That's discretionary.
Okay, so 5% is the discretionary, and then the 4% is intercommunity. And so they're putting up 4%. In this case, we're round numbers about $4 to $5 million annually as a competitive grant where agencies like ours can compete for that money on an annual basis for projects, for technology and things like that. But the intercommunity is specifically designed to tie communities together. And with our projects like the 2X and the 1X and the 3X, I mean, we are better positioned than most agencies to go after that money. So it can be used to support existing services. The only risk that you run is that it's not guaranteed to you every year. So if you get it one year, you put that, money towards the 2X, and then the next year it goes somewhere else, and you have to find the funds to continue that service. So it could be risky, but we're pretty confident that we can make it work for Wilsonville.
So, on to my pet subject, the performance measures. So I didn't see anything in here defining what those performance measures might be. What is the process going to be to identify the performance measures and then to publicize what those performance measures are so that the public knows what the expectations are, and then also then the follow-up to that of how are those actually doing in comparison to what the performance measure goals were?
Yeah, I can start with that at least. So our performance measures, I mean, we're going to be doing reporting quarterly, obviously. And I guess the big piece of that is what makes it successful. Is there a number that makes a particular route or project successful? And for us, for any agency, that varies. There's a lot of dependence on that for the ridership forecasting. So with this, it's a general plan. Once we create the route for it, then we will dig down to, okay, what are the demographics and land use around those routes? So where are the stops? What's the population around those stops? How many businesses around those stops? And so that's when we'll dig down to, okay, to see what our ridership projection should be or could be. And then once we do those reports quarterly, we will review what those numbers look like in comparison to our forecasting, and if they're relative or relatable. And so that's what we base success on. If our ridership is relative to what the forecast would be in those areas or should be, and if it's lower than expectations consistently, that's obviously when we go back to the public, when we come back here and say, well, this doesn't look like it's working out, we might need to put this funding elsewhere as we can move forward into a new plan.
And it should be noted as a subrecipient to the qualified entity being TriMet, they are required to establish performance KPIs, if you will, key performance indicators that all of their subrecipients, including SMART, would have to report on quarterly, I think is what we're thinking. So ODOT puts the onus on them to establish some level of performance, key performance indicators that we need to track.
And I guess, for example, like cost per ride is a key performance measure that we always look at on a fixed route and our dial ride side of things. And so, I mean, obviously, if we implement a new route and it's much more costly on the fixed route than what we currently have on our other routes on average, or passengers per hour is another one, then that's something we would certainly reevaluate if it's not comparable to a related route or a similar or existing route in our system.
Okay, thank you.
Also, just to follow up, in terms of public being in the know, we could totally publish the quarterly reports on our website just to have people check in if they're curious about it.
Yeah, I'm sure there's at least one or two people who might want to do that.
But that's something that we can totally do.
And we track our ridership especially. I mean, that's usually one of the key performance measures that transit systems use. And year over year, we're up. I think this last one was 2.5% or so. The month before that was about almost 8%. So we're trending in the right direction. We'll see. Across the country, ridership is down for. I was in a conference yesterday and the day before in Los Angeles, and with the exception of, I think, King County Metro in Seattle, everybody is seeing decreases. And so I was pleased that we were seeing not huge increases, but slight increases, because everybody else is seeing drastic decreases in ridership across the country. So.
In relation to that, though, how are we doing as a percentage of our population growth? So we might have seen, you know, ridership increase, but how does that relate to our population increase?
I'm not sure about the population increase. That's something that we could follow up on. And also, I mean, population or employment too, like how is our employment level doing? Because we do have a large commuter base. So those two things would be interesting to check in, so I can do that.
Because I don't think a 2% increase would match both a population increase and an employment increase, because we're, you know, like what, around 2% unemployment nationally. I don't know what we are here in town. So I wouldn't be surprised if you factored in those two things, that we probably would be in there along with the rest, where it ends up really being a net decrease in our ridership.
Yeah,
Because we're not that big of an aberration compared to the rest of the 50 states.
I agree, but I've been doing this for 3 decades, and I understand the math that you're doing. That's generally not how we look at it, because populations, you know, shift, they move. You know, if we saw a population decrease in Wilsonville, we wouldn't then, you know, correlate that and say, okay, well, you know, our increase was larger than it was because we had people leaving the city or something like that. So I understand what you're saying, but
so if the population of Wilsonville grew by 3% in 2 years, and you had a ridership increase of 2% in 3 years, you wouldn't equate those two and say that you had a net ridership decrease?
I guess you could. Like I said, in the industry, we generally don't do it that.
Well, it's because the industry's trying to promote itself.
Well, yeah, but I would say that we do what we can as a transit provider. I would suggest that employers need to do their part, meaning incentivize their employees to use transit. We put it out there, but we can't force people out of their cars.
Right. That's not the job of an employer.
Well, yeah, I think it is.
Why?
To incentivize their employees to either van pool, which we're working on, or to use public transit. I mean, I think that is,
Why
it's
is
everybody's
that a
responsibility.
private employer's responsibility?
Well, because we all have a responsibility to the environment, don't we? I mean, I would think that.
Those
I mean,
are
that's why
vastly
we're,
different things.
well, I don't think they are. I think they're the same thing. Because if you have transit and you have good transit and you can take individual cars off the road, then you're helping the environment, right?
Okay, but when it doesn't work for somebody, because there is no transit where they are, and you can't use that transit to get where you're going, it's not the responsibility of the employer where that employee lives.
Well, I've been in business myself, and if I want, especially in a market like this where unemployment is very low, you have to do what you have to do. You have to be creative to get your employees to you, right? And so we're working on van pools and all of these other things to try to connect employees to their employers. That's what we do as a transit company. I mean, that's exactly what we do. That's why we exist. That's our mission.
So the mission is to get employees to their employment?
To get people, whether they're transit dependent or not, to get people to where they want to go. And whether that's Woodburn or Portland or Oregon City or Hillsborough, that's our responsibility. That's what our mission is.
Okay, I don't have a problem with that mission, but I have a problem with it being a private employer's job to get their employee onto transit. That's like telling them which church to go to. If they want to be in a single occupant vehicle, that's that employee's choice.
Absolutely it is.
Well, and I guess it still is, though. I mean,
Yeah.
my company provides incentives, and we can get bus passes on TriMet for
Yeah.
subsidized rates. you know, and so they're providing it as a benefit to the employee.
Right.
I don't have to use it.
Right.
It's an opportunity.
It's an opportunity.
Right.
But
And some people
Mr.
choose.
Bashir just said it was the employer's responsibility to do that.
I think it's everybody's responsibility. I really do. I absolutely believe it's everybody's responsibility
To take public transit?
to do what you can to improve the congestion that all of us in this room complain about, that all of us deal with every day, but are unwilling or unable to do anything about. We are here, we exist to try to do that, and if it doesn't work for you, that's fine. This is America, you have a right not to ride transit, but those that do, we have an obligation to try to make it as convenient for them as we possibly can, to entice them out of their cars and onto transit. That's what we do.
Something else I think of while we talk about this is the state state DEQ requires any employer over 100 employees that they have some kind of trip reduction plan to support lower emissions. And so, I mean, there's state goals out there to support using transit and other forms of transportation. So when it comes to that level, the state does ask employers to provide kind of incentives so that they can encourage their employees to not drive single occupancy every day. So there are goals that align with.
And we work with all the employers locally to develop those plans. And it's amazing to me what some employers, D.W. Fritz comes to mind, what they're willing to do for their employees to entice them to use transit, to not drive their vehicles. It's, you know, I applaud them. I will go on record right now. I've seen their plan. I applaud them.
But it's incentive, not coercion.
No, absolutely not. This is America, right?
The biggest irony I always find whenever transit agencies go before any board is, and I don't know the three of you all at all, but of this board previously, and I don't know about Mr. Heberlein, but I know that I used to be the only person in this room that ever used transit, but my job location changed, and I don't use transit anymore. That was the irony, is that we sat here and we always wanted bikes and we wanted buses, but nobody ever came to any of these meetings via bike or bus. And that's the hypocrisy that I can't stand. I don't have a problem with the bus system. It's the hypocrisy of telling people that you need to go take a bus or ride a bike, and nobody ever does it. And when you look at the demographics of people on buses and mass transit, it's usually people over about, if I know correctly, the national average is something over $80,000 per person is the person who takes mass transit. It's a luxury item, not a necessity, because the people that are at the poverty level, they have a car and they work 3 jobs and transit won't get them there. So, and for me, yes, just because it's a state legislative goal doesn't mean it's coercion to a private employer when you tell them that they must do something.
Well,
So-
we must pay taxes. That's a must. So, you know, I lived in New Orleans and Baton Rouge, and I saw what the result of those folks that didn't have any other means but transit. And what it did, it left them behind, and then the levees breached, and they couldn't get out of there. So I'm passionate about this, and good transit works well for everyone. And so you can't convince me otherwise. It's just what I believe. And I respect your right, and I will defend your right to believe whatever you believe. You know, that's this country. And so, you know, I just believe that transit is a necessary utility. I've always argued that it should be elevated at the level of other utilities. It should be looked at because, you know, you look at police, you look at fire, and they're very important. But most people won't ever have to call the fire department, won't ever have to call the police. But I guarantee you, if you live long enough, you're going to use transit, you're going to need transit. And I heard from someone in this very room that one of the reasons that they chose Wilsonville as a location was because of the transit, and that it's offered to its citizens here in Wilsonville at no cost. I'm very proud of that. And I go around this country and I talk about the system that we run here, that most cities would like to run but aren't able to for whatever reason. So, yeah.
I'm looking at the timeline for the STIF, for the program we're talking about. It seems extremely tight.
Yes.
We're at September 12th. At 2-week intervals, City Council gets it for its 2 readings. And then a week after its second reading, it goes to TriMet. It's very laudable. It's assuming that it's affirmative all the way, and I hope.
Right. Well, I probably need to clarify that. Appendix B was approved by the City Council. It has gone to TriMet. That one is awaiting TriMet to get its plan together and make a November 1st deadline. This particular group of the enhancement programs enhancement strategy is going to be a sister to that and will allow us to pursue the other pots of money that are going to become available.
Okay, then I'll ask the sensitive question. Is TriMet going to make its deadline?
That is a very, very good question. One that TriMet has not been able to answer, at least to my satisfaction. I can tell you that there are 42 qualified entities, including TriMet, and according to ODOT a couple weeks ago, they're only expecting somewhere in the range of 20 to 25 to make the November 1st deadline. There are transit districts, Rogue Valley comes to mind, that has gone on record. I'm on the Oregon Transit Association board, and they have gone on record as one, they're large, fairly large, and they've gone on record they won't make the November 1st deadline. So the next window will be May 1st of 2019, and you can expect to get your first allotment probably in October of 19.
So it would be a 6-month delay.
Yes, yes. So TriMet is pedaling as fast as they can. I can tell you that the Clackamas County service providers, SMART being one, I chaired the advisory committee for Clackamas County, and we were the first to cross the finish line with our list of projects, and we are very proud of that. We actually got praised by ODOT and even TriMet. They weren't sure how we did it, but I told them it wasn't because we were smarter. It was because we got bad information from TriMet and we panicked. And so we literally put our heads down, the group of us, and there were 5 agencies involved, and it was like herding cats. But we got across the finish line because we were panicked, thinking that we weren't going to make the deadline. And then now we did make it across the finish line, and now, but we can't do anything if TriMet doesn't make it. So we'll see. I've got a meeting there on Friday, so we'll have an update by Friday.
Very good. Anything else from the staff? Then I will move on to our single request for input from the community, and that is from Kevin O'Malley.
Thank you, Chair. Planning Commission members, my name is Kevin O'Malley, CEO of the Wilsonville Chamber of Commerce. Our chamber is the advocate for business in our Wilsonville community, and as such, I was proud to serve a role in the Master Transit Plan. We were a conscientious, committed participant, and we as chamber, and certainly all our business, want to continue the excellent transit system that is smart. Going back to the start of that process in late 2015, one of the first things that happened through the process was a request to ask the public what the interests and needs were for transit. And so, very logical question, but representing the business interests, we came back with what we thought was a very logical question, which is, do we expect that there will be more needs, more stop, more traffic, or more transit options? And the answer was yes. And so we said, at what point do we have a discussion about the economic side of the continued sustainability of the transit system? And at that time, we understood that that would happen later. Of course, maybe because I was only 2 weeks into the job, I assumed later meant part of the master transit plan, and there was no attempt to mislead or anything. But as it turned out, as the transit plan wrapped up, we again asked the question, when is the economic conversation happen about priorities and how all this gets funded? And we were told that that would be and it was not by Dwight, he was not here, it was actually by city manager, that there would be a robust, quote, unquote, discussion about all the economics. About 2 months ago, I had a meeting with Dwight about what was going to be proposed for smart use of the transportation bill dollars, and included many of the program enhancements that were here. And we were all in agreement with added service to Woodburn, Oregon City. It serves not only community, but it serves the business interests. Dwight, to his credit, said, you know, things could change. And in fact, a few weeks later, as the Planning Commission was meeting, there were 2 new items on the list that we hadn't yet ever heard about. One was affordable housing, the second was the elimination of fares out of the service areas. I think we can all agree that affordable housing set aside. So the conversation tonight really is about the elimination of fees paid by riders out of the city. We have a serious concern, and we have some very grave reservations about that. Again, this is all built on the foundation that we want SMART to continue to be excellent as a transit system. But in order for that to continue, we would submit to you that we need to continue to ensure that we have equitable, sustainable funding sources. Giving up the only source of revenue SMART receives from riders means we are turning our backs on recovering any costs, most of the costs from the most expensive service that we do. Free fares outside our city may be an ultimate goal, but number 2, throughout the master transit process, we were told that economic discussions happen later. Transit plan is about where the buses run or where the transit runs and how often. I would submit to you that this enhancement, that free, is absolutely economic, and we would suggest that while it may be an important goal, that it's part of that economic analysis discussion. It's not an enhancement. So those are basically our concerns, and we would love to see the continuation of a robust discussion about that, and we would hope that you would consider our comments tonight. Any questions?
I have a question. It's probably not for you. It is how adjustable are we on this point? That is to say, at what point or how soon, how long into it do we make a decision about its viability?
Well, I think we started the meeting, Eric, Mr. Postman talked about all of this having to go through the city council. And so we, SMART, I, as the director, cannot implement anything like the fareless system without the blessing of the city council. And, you know, I know there are some concerns there as well. So it's certainly a battle when the time comes that I'm willing to take on. But it is not, because it's not a priority for our customers. They made that clear. I think it finished 7 out of 7, right? Yes. So I may not be the smartest guy in the room, but I think there are other enhancements that would take priority over that. So when the time comes, Mr. O'Malley will be noticed as he should be, and everybody else will be noticed, and we can have that discussion. But
And I would expect back in this room
yes,
before another group of people at the dais.
And following along with that, you know, from the previous discussions in terms of performance measures, I would assume that, you know, an elimination of out-of-town fairs would come with its own set of performance measures to go along with that. And so the effectiveness of that project would be evaluated as it went through. And so if there was a increase in ridership that would have a benefit to the business community, that might be a reason to keep it going beyond that 1 year. Whereas if that ridership increase didn't materialize, it's not a guarantee that that would continue as a fare-free process, but that we would go back to a fared system. Is that a reasonable assumption?
Yeah, so we've done some light analysis on fare-free systems, looked at other systems here in Oregon as well as around the country. And a good example is our 1X route. The state of Oregon put in a fare-free program for state employees working around the state mall in Salem, and that was for a year. And we saw an immediate increase in ridership for that year. And as soon as that program went away, because funding went away, we saw an immediate decrease. And then you'll see that in any system that goes fareless, that you'll see that jump in ridership. So if that's the priority, to increase ridership, you will see that jump. Obviously, it's going to cost more. Some of the systems we've seen, they usually start out as pilot programs. They usually go on a 1 to up to 3 year basis before they evaluate and to see if, you know, it's still worth funding in that way, or if they need that funding from fares to supplement the whole system. So there's a lot of different options if we were to go that route, but you know, if that was a priority, to go fare free and to look at increasing ridership, and those two typically go together.
More questions?
So what would, this is for Mr. O'Malley, so if the fare-free out-of-city component, so let me backtrack. First of all, I understand the issue in regards to not having the economic conversation. And I wish for everybody's sake, I wish there had been such a thing. But in regards to the funding for the fare-free out-of-city commute, if that was coming from the state grant side or coffer side of it, where it's not Wilsonville's money, would that make a difference?
It certainly would make a difference to the riders that are receiving it.
But in terms of just in terms of the holistic piece of...
It's a really fair question. So going back to my neophyte first month, one of the questions as I was trying to understand transit was, how is it funded? I see it on the budget. And as it was explained to me, basically it's 3 legs to the stool. You have payroll taxes, you have grants, and you have riders. And be corrected, plus or minus a couple %, but it was basically 89 paid by payroll taxes, 19 in grants, and percentage after 2% on fares. And at that time I said, so is there any concern about grants? And the honest answer at that time from the city was no. Fast forward 9 months later, and we have a kind of a tsunami difference in administrations that happened as an election, and nobody had any clue sitting in that room that was likely to happen. But it speaks to the bigger question as business people, which is, if you lose that leg, and there's reasonable men can disagree about whether grants are going to maintain the same from the feds, and you remove the small little 2% that's being paid right now by riders, you're entirely susceptible to payroll tax. Now, there are some, and to his credit as the leader that he doesn't say this publicly, but there have been some that have said it's not as bad as TriMet. We as business people are here because we don't want to deal candidly with TriMet. So the percentage rate may be smaller, but the $1 billion payroll we have is part of the specialness of Wilsonville and what it does for parks and everything else. And we are very sensitive that businesses have other options. So the responsibility of a transit system, we heard eloquently on the responsibility as a community. And we would say as business people, we have the responsibility to step up and say, if that percentage continues to fall ever more on the back of business, that's not a long-term sustainable model. And what that conversation should be is a community-wide conversation. But even in a trial, we're trying to say that's recognizing that you have just taken away the only rider portion of that. And if it's deemed that that's worth the trial, then fine. But as business people, we're seriously concerned that that's down a road without a discussion that's not an enhancement of our system. It's a degradation of the system because it relies, as we start to add more service, the assumption is that people who are riding are going to want to continue to ride for free or they're not going to ride. So what does council or yourself say? We need to continue free fares. Well, we have more service needs continually added, and at some level, payroll doesn't continue to go up or businesses decide otherwise. So that's our concern is we had 100% agreement with all the enhancements with the exception of this being added after. And we want to say, this is our concern, a great concern.
Okay. We're not the ones that will finally make a decision about this, not to kick the can down the road, but the city council will be closer to making that decision.
We're here to share some information and trust that you're here to, you're all stepped up for the right reasons. And so at least we go on record that it's a concern and hopefully it continues to be a discussion point to figure out how to.
That's how I see it. You're keeping it on the record as an open issue.
Yeah. We are very grateful that Louisiana's loss was our gain. We have somebody with a lot of experience and a passion and a vision, and we're excited to see that. We want to continue to make sure that it's a sustainable opportunity for all of us. So.
Thank you. Just one final question for Mr. O'Malley. And you had said that in regards to the mixed use affordable housing piece, you're kind of setting it over for a different time for discussion. Is it just because we know it's not within this budget piece that we're looking at here, and that it would have to be a whole separate budget piece, or why are you kind of separating that out?
First, because it's not germane to right, since it's not on the exact enhancement list, and secondly, there are some ballot measures that are up, and we're in the process of having discussions internally about whether to take positions or not on it. So as the official representative, it's not my place to make any comments about that until there's an internal decision on, where we stand, other than, as is the obvious for everybody in the room, affordable housing is an issue. So.
Okay, and just one clarification since you brought it up. Thanks.
So a question I would have for SMART would be, given that the elimination of out-of-town fares was the lowest priority on the list, what concern would there be if that did go away? And if it was 6 prioritized projects, whether that happened here or at council, I mean, what would the concern be with that?
Well, I think for me, it gives us a great deal more flexibility. It makes us nimble. It also sends a message to the architects of HB 2017 that SMART, the city of Wilsonville, has put everything on the table. The first thing that TriMet did, even ahead of receiving their first check or their first allotment, is that they reduced their fares probably to the tune of about $12 million is what they're estimating. And then they're doing a student fare for about $500, almost $490,000. So they put that out there ahead of, and they don't know if they don't get their plan approved by are in by November 1st and approved and everything, the monies that they're spending right now on those programs will be lost. And they know that, but they rolled the dice, and the programs that they've put out there, including the first one was the fair. I think it started July 1st.
Yeah.
Reduced fare. And so I think it really does send a message to the architects that, you know, we're players. We've put everything on the table, and I think it's important to show that. Personally, I do.
To echo and add to a little bit, I think there's 7 requirements in the legislation, and 2 of them hit on how are you serving low-income populations, like what projects are you producing that help serve low-income, and that was one project that we felt did address that requirement, but there were also several other requirements in terms of service enhancements, reduce service fragmentation, introduce electric, natural gas vehicles. So just to add to that, that was some of our logic behind that project proposal.
And besides getting approval from the city council at some point, we would have to get approval through the advisory committee, TriMet's board, and then the OTC ultimately before we could even, you know, implement that type of program. So.
Does the fact that the out-of-town fairs idea have the second lowest cost in this list cause it to be low-hanging fruit and more likely to jump ahead in the line?
Personally, no. I mean, like I said, the folks have spoken. For me to suggest to the team that we move that forward, you know, would be selfish on my part, and I'm just not interested in that. I've got some electric buses. That's part of the reason I was in LA. We have electric buses coming in the first part of the year. Hopefully, when everything is said and done, I'll have 3. And I am certainly interested in using, that's low-hanging fruit for me. And the only buses that you can use this money on are electric buses and or compressed natural gas buses, which we operate both. So we're in a very, very good position to match some federal grants with that, you know, with that money. My staff isn't excited about that because it's not adding service to the street, but which they would prefer to do. But I also have a business to manage, and we run it like a business, and so that will allow us to you know, keep our reserves at a healthy level, so that we, you know, if we fall on difficult times, which I don't anticipate we will, we'll be prepared. And, you know, to hopefully make Kevin a little bit more comfortable. I think, you know, what's happening now with HB 2017 really puts any discussion at all about the employer side of the payroll tax offer. I can't even imagine, you know, at what point we would need to have that type of discussion. This money is going to put us on a sustainable track for years to come. And the $185,000 for the out-of-town fairs is, as you said, it's the smallest on the list. And it's, you know, it's monies that the formula funds would more than cover. But again, it's not a priority for anybody in this room, including myself at this point, because they've made that clear to me. And if Kevin doesn't know anything else about me, I think he will tell you that I am a man of my word. I've given him my word on a few occasions and have delivered on that. So I don't see it as being an issue, but I appreciate the kind words that he has said, and I appreciate and respect his position in fighting for the businesses here in Wilsonville, which he does an incredible job for, and he's quite a. I enjoy sparring with him from time to time. So most of the time we get along really great. So.
Okay, thank you. Do we have any more? Then I will Thank you all for.
Thank you again for your service and your time.
Thank you.
And I will close the public hearing on this matter this time. We have, this is a time for our deliberation.
I'll just, since we just heard from it, I mean, I'll just echo what we've been saying, and that is that I think, I do have concerns about the fairness portion, but I'm taking comfort in the fact that we've got additional process and knowing where it came through in the priority scale and, you know, considering it's down on the priority list to the point that my guess is other things might find its way on top of the priority list ahead of it later on down the road as we get there. I'm very sensitive to what Mr. O'Malley had to say, which is that, you know, we have to be a little bit concerned about the sustainability of removing one of three funding sources, even though it's a small funding source. I also have sincere concerns about communicating to businesses that we expect you to carry a very large load of this without any sort of contribution from the ridership. So I'm just sensitive to that issue. So, but I take comfort in the fact that knowing that there's additional process and that Mr. O'Malley is going to have plenty of opportunity to speak for the chamber on behalf of local businesses when that process pops up, if there's any notion that it doesn't fit the business community's priorities. So I've heard a lot of things that made me feel a lot more comfortable today, and I'm prepared to move forward based upon those assurances that we're hearing today.
All right, then we have a resolution on the table. Someone wish to make a motion to adopt?
I certainly would. Yes, I move to approve resolution number LP 18-0009, recommending that the Wilsonville City Council amend the 2017 Transit Master Plan for the inclusion of the program's enhancement strategy.
I'll second.
Been moved and seconded that we advance this proposal to the City Council with our recommendation to adopt. Those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Unanimous that the resolution is adopted. And we move to our, should we take a little break? Do we need to take a break?
You got the gavel.
Well, I can rule it. It would extend the length of the meeting, so.
A few minutes is
If you
fine.
need to take a break,
No,
let's take
no,
a break.
This is fine, either way.
We're free to step out if we need to. So we'll move right on to our second hearing of the night, and I'm not quite clear, perhaps our attorney will clarify it. My own recollection is that we continued our deliberation, but not the public input on this matter. Am I correct about that?
I believe that's correct.
So
Dan's nodding, so I'm going to say that's correct.
the minute said we closed the public hearing.
Right.
Yes.
But not our deliberations. Right?
The deliberation was continued to tonight.
Correct.
Okay.
So I will reopen that phase of the discussion.
Good evening. If you'd like, I can share some information from the deliberations and changes to the proposed code amendments from following the July discussion. So if you'll recall, there were three main things, topics, and we can either get feedback one by one, or I can cover them all real quick, and then we can talk about all of them. So there was the whether or not to require CC&Rs and future subdivisions to allow ADUs. There was discussion of having some level of clear and objective design criteria for ADUs, as well as the discussion of lot coverage. So I can go by one. So if your preference, you want me to pause and talk about each one, get feedback on each one, or do you want me to cover them all and then we can talk about them all?
I think we need an opportunity to look at all three of the items.
All right.
Do you want to take us through the major adjustments that have?
Yeah, I'll take, and it's just a short little presentation I have here. So first of all, the CCNRs required to allow ADUs, based on the feedback, what I heard is leave the code as it is. However, I would note, recently coming to light is the Metro COO's recommendation, draft recommendation for UGB expansion, and that they are likely to require this as part of the UGB expansion for Frog Pond East and South. So I pulled out here what it says. It says, this talks about overall recommendations for these residential expansion areas in all four proposed cities that were proposed. It says require that any future homeowners associations in the expansion areas not regulate ADUs. Any such regulation should occur only through city zoning that complies with state law. So I wanted to bring that up because as we kind of discussed last time, though it hasn't happened yet, this is likely the direction that higher regulators are going. Still we can put the language in still or leave it out. So we'll leave that to the direction of the commission and the council at this point. In terms of architectural standards, again, the idea is here is really wanted to keep it to a minimum that really accomplishes in an efficient manner what wants to be avoided. So recommending kind of two simple requirements. First of all is roof pitch, allowing a wide variety. This is the 4 to 12 and to 12 to 12. That's the full, for example, that's the full gamut from a ranch to a farm to a steep farmhouse roof. So it allows for a lot of variety, but it avoids like a flat roof, like, container or something like that. The only exception would be if by chance you had a modern home that had a flat roof, you could have a flat roof ADU. And then beyond that, roof and siding materials match one or more. The discussion was that maybe it's kind of too strict to make it match that house, but if the neighbor's house was a different material or there was a house down the street that was a different material, matching that would be okay as well, because there's kind of an assumption there that that maintains some neighborhood compatibility. And also that fiber cement materials made to appear like wood or stucco would be okay as well to match the lap siding or stucco or real stucco. Then lot coverage, did a lot more digging on this, and it was, yeah, it's like one of those house projects that everything you turn around, it becomes a bigger project. So it's kind of a mess when you start looking at our lot coverage in a lot of ways. But some of the key things I found, and this will inform kind of the recommendation made tonight, is that the review issue where we're not able to approve additional lot coverage tends to not be due to what's written in the code today, but it tends to be based on the lot coverages approved as part of planned developments based on old zoning, pre-2000 zoning codes. There's also found that as those familiar with DRB, as most of you are, is that there were a lot of waivers and variations in lot sizes for different PDRs due to master plans balancing density between multifamily and single family. You think of Wilsonville Meadows and how it was balanced with apartment projects, or even Courtside Estates and how it was balanced with condo projects. And so what you end up with in that is, so an 8,000 square foot under, if you just look at the current zone, an 8,000 square foot lot at Park at Merrifield, which is zone PDR2, and there's no like density transfers or anything that happened there, it's allowed a 30% lot coverage. While the same size of lot, similar era of home, similar size of home, on same size of lot in Wilsonville Meadows or Courtside Estates would be allowed up to 75% under the current zoning. So kind of as we talk about this more down the road, probably likely staff's recommendation would be more going towards a lot size based lot coverage standard rather than a zone based lot coverage standard. And other things is also is really interesting as I crunched the numbers, that there is a wide variety across within neighborhoods, within the same zone, and across the same lot size throughout the city. So, I mean, it was interesting to see that maybe it's not necessarily a defining element of the design of these subdivisions, and that there is a lot of variation that doesn't detract from the overall design and feel of these subdivisions. So, but again, we can talk about that more later. Some examples, Fox Chase has about 20% of the properties with more than 30%, while about a third have less than 20%. Park and Merrifield, about 26% have more than 30% lot coverage, while about 20% have less than 20%. And what's really interesting, and this last number, I want to note that I excluded Charbonneau and Villeroy in this calculation because we know that their lot coverages are higher and they have all sorts of waivers and exceptions and special circumstances. But for the rest of the city, there's approximately 1,000 lots in that largest category of 6,000 to 8,000 square feet. And about a fifth of those have lot coverages over 35%, and about a fifth have lot coverages 20% or lower of similarly sized lots. So it was all over the place, and it was really interesting research. So based on that, if you've looked at your work program, you'll note that coming up soon will be a discussion of some other residential code edits dealing with density and the way we calculate density and the open space requirements. So it makes sense to defer this discussion because it's a lot broader than ADUs to that, to go along with that. We're giving a lot more time for a broader conversation and understanding of all the issues and how we might best approach this issue going forward. So with that, we wouldn't make any changes to the lot coverage, and everything else that was presented back in July remains essentially the same.
I note that we're scheduled to look at the density issue in December.
Yes, so that's coming up.
Hopefully with some advanced material to digest before then.
Yes, there's plenty of material to digest.
But perhaps an informational item on the November agenda.
So just to be clear though, so we're not then recommending any change to the lot coverage. They'll remain the same, and at least as its current iteration, ADUs must still comply with lot coverage requirements.
Correct.
As it stands right now. Okay. Just want to make sure because it's, I thought that's what I was reading, but I wanted to make sure that there's a lot of red lines there, so.
Yeah, Okay. Because again, as it was talked about last time, the same issues exist for additions or other desires to use lots. So it should be approached more holistically.
And so to summarize your three major areas, the first area is relating to CC&Rs, and those changes to the code have been removed from what we saw here, from what's in our packet. The second one being the architectural standards, that has been added to what's here in the code. And then the third one has been removed from the code as well. So we have a net addition in the code of 1 and 2 removals back to what it originally was. Was that an
Actually,
accurate
not
assessment?
removed, but suspended.
Yes. Yeah. So yeah, that's a good point, is that it ends up being more a modification of the design requirements rather than adding something additional, because there are existing design requirements.
Sure.
And we're deferring consideration of the third item.
Yes.
A point of just basic information for me, I'm ignorant about what Wilsonville considers a subdivision. And how many of these do we have? How large are they?
So subdivision is more than four, is 4 or more lots.
4 or more lots.
Yes.
Is there any maximum number subdivision? In Viable, how many subdivisions are there?
Technical subdivisions, there's quite a few. I mean, they vary in size from, from from 3 lots to, with open space tracts to hundreds.
Do these correspond to individual applications to DRB?
Not necessarily. But I mean, generally, yes. Generally, yes. Villebois had a few weird things happen, but generally, yes.
The reason I'm asking is that there are at a couple, 2 or 3 points, references to subdivision as the relevant environment that that a proposed ADU would have to conform with, rather than simply the lot, what the other property on the lot, or even the adjacent lots. Any other property in the subdivision would be a suitable precedent for an architectural decision.
Sure, and I think as far as I can think, I mean, every subdivision in Wilsonville has the same architectural standards throughout, styles and kind of era of development. I can't think of any,
Okay.
Modern subdivision that has variations that would have a negative impact on the compatibility of an ADU.
So within a 3-block subdivision, if you have, if you are related to a style 2 blocks away, you can be pretty sure that it's also going to relate to the surrounding houses,
Yeah,
the adjacent houses.
yeah, you're going to tend to have, yeah.
I can think of at least one big exception, but it is the big exception, and that's Old Town, of course.
Which has its own standards
It has
that,
its own overlay zone.
yeah, that take precedence over these design standards.
That was actually my most uncomfortable point in your whole treatment of the architectural standards. I'm not happy with it, by the way, but I realize that our hands are constrained. I think that it is a big mistake, and I really do resent having to comply with requirements that are driven by our big sister to the north, which have little to do with us or to most of Oregon. But I realize that that's a political fact.
Understood.
Can I delve into you with you just a couple of the technical, you don't have it in front of you, do you?
Yeah, no,
grab.
the code? Yeah, I
Yeah,
have it right here.
the red line version, just because I think,
Yeah,
I got one question, one thing that was just kind of bugging me that I want to make sure that we get on the record, and then nothing too fantastic. So the first one, Dan, is on page 11 of 56. It's in the definitions section.
Yeah,
And this is just a simple point that I want to make sure we all understand. Something got goofy with your red line there when you took the dwelling unit, removed it below, moved it back up, and your numbering's going to get funny when you actually accept these red lines, just so you know.
Yeah.
So
And-
I just bring that up for the sake of substance. I don't think it matters here, but
That's Scrivener.
Tammy takes good care of that stuff.
good. I just want to make sure that that's not going to get goofy since we've got multiple red lines there. The other question I had for you, Dan, is on 18 of 56. And I'm kind of going off of memory. Dead center in the middle of the page, you got the one that says accessory dwelling unit should be in the same lot as the dwelling units, which they are subordinate. Didn't we have some discussion about, or wasn't there something in here about sometimes they may not be on the same lot?
So under the current code,
Yeah.
that under one of the definitions, it says it can be accessory uses in general, not necessarily ADUs, may be on an adjacent lot.
Okay.
And I think that tends to be more applicable to potentially like a industrial or a commercial project.
Sheds, barns, those sorts of things that are industrial.
Right,
Okay.
and so there was actually in the definition section.
Yeah, I think that's, now that you say that, I think that's where I was seeing it. Because I was concerned if we needed an except here, but what you're telling me is that's for accessory uses that are not ADUs.
Yeah, so.
Okay.
And then in the definition section where it used to read, an accessory use may be located on lots adjoining the main use if approved.
Mm-hmm.
I added for non-residential uses.
Gotcha.
So for residential, it always needs to be on that same.
That's what I wasn't seeing there, because I was worried about the except, if we needed an exception there.
Good thought.
The last question that I had for you, just because for the sake, and I've kind of in a roundabout way asked this before, but in the resolution, we end up having two sections there. One that says, whereas the city of Wilsonville encourages construction of accessory dwelling units to provide needed housing, particularly for smaller households. And then the one below that says where the city of Wilsonville further encourages construction of accessory dwelling units. We do have that in a stated policy from council, is that right?
That is correct.
Okay, do we know where that is, just for the sake of the record on that?
I know I read it as I was doing this. I don't have the reference.
Okay.
I go back to the ordinance that adopted the current ADU standards back in whenever it was. The last time we changed our code for ADUs.
I'm probably going to get this wrong now that it's being called out, but I'm pretty sure it's ordinance number 796 and 797.
Oh, I didn't expect that kind of specificity.
But I could be wrong, or it's either like 676 or 767.
When you just say in an ordinance.
It is in an
You're throwing a
ordinance. It's
number.
actually in two ordinances, back to back.
Because I would just suggest to everybody humbly that maybe we should be saying that rather than saying that the city of Wilsonville encourages. Maybe we need to say that there's a stated policy, or I don't know. You know, Amanda, maybe you have a better idea of what that language should be. It just seems awkward to me to say the city of Wilsonville encourages, because we should be referencing even vaguely something or another. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think saying something to the effect of has an adopted policy of, or has adopted a policy of encouraging.
Yeah, that's a valid point. So I like that. That's all that I had, I think.
I'm looking for the reference. It appears wherever it is, and I can't locate it immediately. It is possible to have a zero setback in some circumstances where you have the agreement of the adjacent property owner. Do you recall where that is and what the?
Yeah. That's section 4.133. It's in the in the language very close to the ADU language. From a practical standpoint, unless it seems people have this idea, actually the last ADU that we had requested, not going down to 0, but wanting to go down to like 5 or something. It becomes difficult for individual homeowners because not only do you need the homeowner's permission, you need the lien holder's permission and get it all recorded, and there's a lot of paperwork. It goes on the title, and so it for an individual homeowner to go talk to all their neighbors and all their banks to do it tends to be pretty burdensome and typically doesn't happen.
So it's not likely to take place across the city.
Correct. It's not likely to be widely used.
Right. That's what I mean. I'm thinking of my own little neighborhood where our houses do have a pretty small setback requirement already. I think 6 feet on the side. But the next little subdivision north of us has houses as close together as 6 feet.
Yes.
But the language that I read suggests that it would be possible if you get the agreement of the next door neighbor and you're willing to go through the legal steps, that you could go right up to that property line. And presumably the other property owner could too, and you'd have essentially row houses. We used to have a designation detached rows.
Yes, in Villeball, we still do. It was a creature created for the village center.
Yes. I note with approval the accommodation that's been made to our concern about parking and ADUs. As I recall, I don't have it open in front of me, but there is a requirement in the proposal here for one parking place per ADU. And if none is available on the property, then 45 feet of available parking on the curb, on the street is required. Am I remembering that correctly?
You are. So it is one on-site, the way it's written is one on-site standard size space, but you can use, if there's 45 feet of available curb space that's not already spoken for to meet other requirements, then that can be applied in lieu of that on-site space.
That, I think, does answer some of the concern that we had about the parking load on
Sure.
neighborhoods posed by ADUs.
Yeah, I guess my only comments is I just thank you, Dan, for your work in updating this. I know we had a very contentious meeting last time, and so I appreciate your effort coming back and working to meet our needs and also meeting the intent of the House bill. So thank you again. My only disappointment is that you didn't have any opportunity to talk about habitable floor area. So if you wanted to, we can still talk about it.
I was a little strategic there, yeah.
Still have time to ask a question?
Yeah, I couldn't come up with a good one.
It is covered.
I know, but he didn't talk about it.
Oh, okay.
It's a disappointment.
Word I can't say, yeah.
Anything over here?
No, I don't, other than just, are we good enough with our record right now to just say revisions to the resolution we discussed on the record? Okay. What does that mean?
Commissioner Hurley, I haven't heard from you.
Where do we stand, or what are, on the recommendations for the expansion proposals where he had it highlighted for possibly requiring basically the banishment of the ability to banish ADUs in his slide presentation?
That actually only applies to one HOA that.
Right, so, I mean, there's the option of apply it to, Frog Pond West as well, but I'm hearing not a lot of interest in doing that. So what would essentially happen is likely, rather than being a blanket requirement in the code, it ended up being incorporated in potentially a code amendment for the RN zone potentially when that master planning work's done for those areas. Would be likely the way that'd be approached.
Okay, so at this point you're saying...
Right now, we're not doing anything is what I'm hearing.
Okay,
Sounds like
because
what I'm hearing.
while my colleagues were parsing other pieces, I was looking at the chief operating officer recommendations from Metro in regards to this. And it's interesting because on page 7, they put in there, one of the bullet points says, set an expectation that the 4 cities will explore ways to encourage the construction of ADUs in the expansion areas. For example, this could be accomplished either by encouraging construction of ADUs at the same time primary dwelling are being built, or placing square footage limits on primary dwellings to encourage adequate lot space remains for future construction of ADUs. Yet, when they go to the Wilsonville section, they put in there, with that in mind, I recommend that the city look for ways to integrate additional housing choices throughout the plan. And then they finalize it with, likewise, the city should update its code to comply with the state law by clarifying that at least one ADU is allowed, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm not seeing Metro saying that we have to do anything beyond what we're doing here today.
Correct, not today.
So.
Primary, say it.
Primary.
Okay, now,
Primary.
now you know his word. That's the
Primary.
good news for
Primary.
you.
I personally see no problem in the policy regarding future development. And it only affects, that is to say, the issues should be dealt with at the master planning stage. I have a little bit of a problem with existing HOAs, but it only affects one, and which happens to be a neighbor of ours, but I'm not aware of any public outcry there. I think it's perfectly justified going forward with new development that requirements should be established by the city in its code, period.
Yeah, and so those are really the options that we could say. The difference is that if we adopt a code for the whole city, it also apply to these subdivisions coming up in Frog Pond West, in addition to Frog Pond North, or Frog Pond East and Frog Pond South.
Any more? No, we're ahead of schedule. Actually, we've caught up. Then, thank you very much. Do you have anything else for us?
No, thank you.
Thank you very much. I will declare our public hearing and deliberation on the ADU matter closed. We're ready for deliberation prior to a motion. Then can we hear a motion?
Certainly. I recommend that I move to adopt Resolution LP 18-0006, recommending adoption of accessory dwelling unit ADU development code amendments to City Council, including the revisions previously read into the record.
I'll second.
Thank you. It's been moved and seconded that we adopt Resolution LP 18-006. Those in favor, say aye.
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 Aye. That is unanimous. The resolution is adopted and forwarded to City Council. And with that, we have, thank you, Dan.
Thanks, Dan.
Thank you, Dan.
We have a report from City Council, their action minutes. Any comments, questions to send back to council? Very good. Then we have finally our work plan for the remainder of the year. I've already noted that we are visiting the density inconsistency revisions. Interesting designation. The density issues in a work session in December. We have continuation of our Boones Ferry Master Park plan coming up next month. I will have to refresh myself about what our open issues are there.
So you have not even seen the plan, unfortunately, because we had no text when we reviewed the site plan. We saw a site plan. There is now going to be a small report that will accompany that site plan that will discuss a number of issues involving the citizen engagement component of the process, the French Prairie Bridge, access to the water, a number of things like that. So I've taken my first crack at, it's maybe 10 to 12 pages in length, so it's not terribly difficult to get through. I've given my comments back to Parks. It's going to go through some internal revisions in preparation for your public hearing. So you will at least have a report in addition to that site plan to be reviewing and evaluating for that adoption. And that one's on track.
Remind me, have we had a work session on this?
Just on the site plan, if you recall, it had the promenade across the top of the bank of the river. It had a significant number of new parking spots. It had a couple of docks down on the water bank. It had a little boathouse. Significant improvements from a trail perspective. And what were some of the other major features? A basketball court relocated, larger lawn area, some enhancements to the Toshman House in general, just surrounding property, new playground.
Yeah, there was a couple recommendations about moving a couple of things so that it was more picnic area and less by the
Yes.
by the parking
yes,
area.
yeah.
There was a few just recommendations on where things were being cited, so.
So you'll see all of that coming back before you. Some of the cost estimates will be included because we didn't have any of those. So the consultant has been working on the cost estimates so that and the prioritization of those projects, just like we're familiar with on all the projects that we do, especially these long-range master plans. We've got short-term, medium-term, long-term. We've got to understand the costs. What can we afford to pay for? What are the priorities? How do we want to sequence these things? So I imagine that to be a pretty significant part of the conversation, making sure that the priorities are appropriate and that we can move through things in a reasonable fashion.
Wasn't there some questions about where the bridge was going to be? Also, if that was approved, how it impacted that park and overall?
Absolutely.
Well, we had a lot of this in the form of information updates more than work sessions. We haven't really. It seems to me that we're a little less of a finished state going into this hearing than we have been on some other issues.
I would agree in that you haven't seen the plan that you're about to adopt or being asked to adopt. So that is atypical for the process that I run. As you know, I always give you one at a minimum, usually more, sometimes have some 6 months, 10 months of work sessions, depending what the topic is, till we're comfortable with that. Now, I could definitely communicate the concern. I could see if we can get that plan distributed early prior to the 1 week, and that would give you some time to digest it. If a continuation is warranted, a continuation is warranted, and you do not have any pressure or obligation to adopt anything on a night that you're being asked to see it for the first evening with 7 days prior read. So please do not feel any pressure regarding that aspect of it. If you need to hold it and chew on it for a month, then that's what we do, and we'll deal with the consequences of that and the scheduling of council agendas after that. But you have to take the time that you need in order to make the appropriate recommendation to the council.
Now, how does this fit with the Parks and Recs master plan?
Well, it's going to be a subset of it. And, obviously the costs are not rolled up into that citywide plan because the cost estimates didn't exist at the time of creation of that plan. However, the project lists can be updated pretty easily via a resolution. And because this is going through the city council, it'll be adopted via a resolution by the council, and at which point those Boones Ferry Park projects are an extension of and become, fold into essentially of the citywide plan. So it's one.
So is it technically an amendment to the master plan?
It's not an amendment, but the Citywide Parks Master Plan does reference both the creation of the Boones Ferry Park Master Plan and also references that the costs for those projects will be contained in the Boones Ferry Park Master Plan. So it does allude to that existence, just like it does with the already existing Memorial Park Master Plan, which was also adopted by resolution rather than ordinance.
And then there is also a project to update systems development charges for parks across all those sectors. So that would include taking the citywide plan, the new citywide plan, the Memorial Plan from a couple of years ago, the Boones Plan, getting all those project lists created so that there's one comprehensive project list, then running through the methodology of an SDC review and potential update to those numbers. So that's a budgeted project that's found in the 1819 city budget, doing that SDC update. Currently, engineering is working on the sewer and the water updates based on the master plans that you reviewed. It's been a year. Usually those systems updates, we try to get them close. Sometimes it takes a year to 2 years, sometimes even beyond, to get to the methodology update that really drives the fees that are charged at the development counter. So I will make a note to get that out early and do my best to do that. But again, there's no, if that doesn't happen, we'll just do what we have to do. If we have 100 questions, we send them back and we'll do it the next month as well.
Great. Anything else for the good of the order?
I have one unfortunate update. Blaze Edmonds passed away this week. We are very sad to report that he lost his battle with cancer. And
How long had he been with the city?
30 years.
Yeah.
There's going to be a celebration of life on the 21st at the old church for Blaze. So hopefully some of you might be able to make that.
All right, then, I will gavel us closed at, we are adjourned at 7:54. Bang, I love it.